In 1913, one of the world's most brilliant psychiatrists began having disturbing visions. Carl Jung saw blood running through the streets of Europe, bodies floating in red rivers, and believed he was going insane. But what he did next changed not only his life, but our entire understanding of the human mind. Jung made a decision that few would dare. Instead of running from his inner darkness, he dove headfirst into it. For 6 years, he voluntarily descended into what he called confrontation with the unconscious, a journey that nearly destroyed him, but revealed secrets about our psyche that we use to this day. How does someone manage to emerge transformed from their own mental health? And more importantly, what did Jung discover down there that can change how you see yourself? Carl Gustav Jung was born in 1875 in Switzerland, son of a poor pastor and a mother who was, let's say, a bit eccentric. She claimed to have visions and talk to spirits. For a sensitive child like Carl, this mystical atmosphere left deep marks. Jung was an introverted, imaginative child who hated school so much he would faint to escape classes. But when his father worried about his future, something changed. Carl dove into his studies, especially philosophy and religion, as if searching for answers to questions that had haunted him since childhood. He graduated in medicine, became a psychiatrist, and in 1907, the meeting that would change his life happened. He met Sigmund Freud. For 6 years, they maintained an intense friendship. Freud saw Jung as his intellectual heir. Jung saw Freud as the father he never had. They exchanged more than 350 letters, and together they even developed theories that revolutionized psychology. But two brilliant minds rarely fit in the same space. Jung began questioning Freudian theories. Freud didn't accept being questioned. What started as scientific disagreement turned into personal conflict. In 1913, the break was definitive. Jung lost not only a mentor, but an entire scientific community, since he was going against the main psychoanalytic movement of the time, so he came to be seen as a traitor to psychoanalysis, and at 38 years old, found himself completely alone. But it was exactly this rupture that led Jung to the most dangerous psychological experiment in history. December 1913. Jung was in his office when the first vision came. A Europe covered in blood, thousands of bodies floating in icy waters. A voice telling him,
"Look closely, this will happen in August."
Jung thought he was losing his sanity. But in August 1914, World War I exploded exactly as he had seen. His visions weren't madness, they were premonitions. This led him to a terrifying question. If his mind could predict the future, what other secrets was it hiding? And more importantly, how far would he dare to go to find out? Most people would run, but Jung did the opposite. He decided to consciously dive into his own inner darkness. "I need to let my unconscious speak," he wrote in his diary. "I need to descend to wherever it wants to take me." Jung developed a technique he called active imagination. Every day, he would sit in silence and allow images, voices, and strange figures to emerge from his mind, but not like a passive dream. He interacted with them, conversed, questioned, and what he found down there was terrifying. Dark figures that challenged him, voices that mocked his insecurities, violent impulses he didn't even know he possessed. It was as if he had a part of himself that seemed to want to destroy him. Jung called this part the shadow. Everything we reject, repress, and pretend doesn't exist in us. For 6 years, Jung documented everything in a book he called the Red Book. Page after page of dialogues with unconscious figures, disturbing drawings, revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about himself. There were days when Jung could barely function. His wife Emma came to fear he would never return to normal. He himself admitted that sometimes he felt as if enormous blocks of stone were falling on him, but gradually things began to change. The more Jung faced his inner darkness, the more it lost power over him. The dark figures that once terrorized him began to reveal wisdom. The destructive impulses transformed into creative energy. Jung was discovering a revolutionary truth. Our inner darkness is not our enemy. It's a source of power that only becomes dangerous when we ignore it. What Jung discovered in his journey through the unconscious forever changed our understanding of the human mind. First, he mapped the structure of the human psyche in a way no one had done before. Imagine your mind as a 3-story house. On the top floor, we have consciousness, which is everything you know about yourself, your thoughts, accessible memories, your conscious personality. This is where your ego lives, your narrative identity, who you believe you are. But there's also the persona, the mask you wear to be socially accepted. It's the me you show at work, with friends, in public, an edited version of who you are. On the middle floor is the personal unconscious, forgotten memories, repressed traumas, aspects of your personality you've rejected. This is where the shadow lives, everything you don't want to be. And in the basement of the house is the collective unconscious, universal patterns, ancestral symbols, instincts inherited from all humanity. Jung called these patterns archetypes, but the most revolutionary discovery was about the shadow. Jung realized that since childhood, we repress parts of ourselves. When a child shows anger, parents say,
"Good children don't get angry."
When they're too assertive,
"Don't be selfish."
when they show fear,
"Be strong."
gradually we learn that certain parts of us are unacceptable, so we push them into the unconscious, but they don't disappear. They become the shadow. And here's the most important part. The shadow doesn't contain only our aspects considered bad. It also holds positive qualities that were repressed. A person raised to not bother others may have repressed their natural assertiveness. Someone taught that money is bad may have pushed their ambition into the shadow. A child who learned that crying is a sign of weakness may have lost touch with their sensitivity. The shadow is like a compressed file of everything we are but don't have the courage to be. And when we ignore it, it acts on its own. Have you ever sabotaged yourself when life was going well? When you finally got close to achieving something, you went and ruined it all? That's the shadow. Have you ever had that bad feeling about someone you just met? It seems like you just didn't like that person? That's also the shadow. In this case, the projected shadow. Jung discovered that we project our shadow onto others. What most irritates us in people is often a reflection of what we repress in ourselves. The person who harshly judges others' falseness may be denying their own tendency toward manipulation. Someone who obsessively criticizes others' laziness may be running from their own impulses to rest. Jung summarized this in a phrase that changed psychology. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the most fascinating part is that Jung discovered that integrating the shadow doesn't make us bad people. On the contrary, it makes us more complete people. Jung didn't stop at the individual shadow. He realized that entire societies also have collective shadows, aspects that an entire culture represses and denies. The movie Fight Club perfectly illustrates this concept. How can a society of apparently civilized and successful men transform into a destructive and violent organization? Jung had an answer for this. When an entire society denies its collective shadow, it explodes in an even more destructive way. The society portrayed in the film had built an image of itself as a consumerist, corporate, and controlled culture, but it pushed into the collective shadow its impulses of violence, its need for primitive purpose, and its rage against the artificiality of modern life. When this collective shadow exploded through Fight Club, ordinary people like office workers, salespeople, and urban workers ended up participating in increasingly extreme acts. This was possible because individuals who don't know their own shadow become easy prey for the collective shadow. When you don't know you have violent and destructive impulses, you become vulnerable when these impulses are socially legitimized through a movement that promises liberation from artificial life. The individual unconscious of his shadow, Jung wrote, will be possessed by society's shadow. And this doesn't just happen in extreme contexts like in the movie. It happens every day in more subtle ways. Social media that preaches perfect lives pushes excessive comparison, frustration, and depression. A society that rejects its natural aggressiveness may manifest it through justified institutional violence, finding reasons to vent this aggressiveness. An example of integrating one's own shadow and controlling impulses is martial arts. As a rule, people who fight are calmer and have more control over emotions than others. The more you know your own shadow, the less vulnerable you become to the collective shadow. When you know you have violent impulses, you don't need to project them onto enemies or seek movements that legitimize this violence. When you accept your impulses, you can consciously choose to act differently. After 6 years diving into his own darkness, Jung emerged with a revolutionary understanding about the purpose of human life. For Jung, our mission is not to be perfect, it's to be complete. He called this process individuation, becoming truly who you are, integrating all aspects of your personality. The sole purpose of human existence, Jung said, is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. But how does this work in practice? The process begins when you stop running from the aspects of yourself you consider unacceptable. It's like going downstairs to a dark basement. The natural tendency is to flee from what you find there. But Jung discovered that only by facing these dark parts do they lose the power to control you. Imagine you were raised to always be positive and pleasant. Your shadow may contain repressed anger, natural assertiveness, even a certain cruelty necessary to establish boundaries. While you deny these parts, they'll act unconsciously, perhaps through passive-aggressive comments, self-sabotage, or inexplicable explosions. But when you recognize that you have anger, have aggressive impulses, or can be cruel when necessary, these energies stop being destructive and become conscious tools. Your anger can transform into passion for justice. Your aggressiveness can become determination to achieve goals, and your cruelty can become the ability to make difficult but necessary decisions. Jung called this enantiodromia, when opposites transform into each other. Your greatest weakness, when integrated, can become your greatest strength. Just like Bruce Wayne used bats, which were his childhood fear, he chose to become what he most feared to inspire fear in criminals, transforming his weakness into strength. But the process isn't easy. Jung compared working with the shadow to the 12 labors of Hercules, a long, difficult journey that requires constant courage. Integrating the shadow means destroying the illusion of who you thought you were. It means admitting you're more complex, more contradictory, more human than your perfect self-image would like to recognize. That's why many people prefer to live in fantasy, where it's more comfortable to imagine we're pure light than to accept we also have darkness. But Jung discovered a fundamental truth. There is no light without shadow, just as there is no wholeness without imperfection. The ultimate goal of individuation is to integrate opposites, conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow, internal masculine and feminine. Jung called this integrated wholeness the self, your true and complete self. When you approach the self, three things happen. You stop being controlled by unconscious emotions. You feel anger, fear, sadness, but with awareness, not as their victim. You stop projecting your shadow onto others, and this radically transforms your relationships. You see people as they are, not as screens for your projections. You gain access to energies that were previously wasted on repression. It's as if half your vital energy were released all at once. And paradoxically, you become more attractive and magnetic. Integrated people who have accepted their complexity have a presence that is simultaneously powerful and reassuring. Jung summarized the process with a phrase: the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. First, you need to recognize when your shadow is acting. Here are the 4 most common signs. Do you have intense and apparently disproportionate emotional reactions? You know when you realize you're feeling too much anger over something simple? This usually indicates that something touched your shadow. The intensity of the reaction rarely has to do with the present situation. It has to do with something repressed that was activated. Do you harshly judge certain characteristics in other people? Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. If you feel instant hatred for someone's arrogance, there may be repressed arrogance within you. Do you sabotage yourself when things are going well? The shadow often carries limiting beliefs about what we deserve. If you were taught that good people don't seek attention, your shadow may sabotage your success to maintain this identity. Or even that success only comes with hard work. You may unconsciously sabotage yourself because the task is too easy. Do you feel like you're living a life that isn't yours? This may indicate that your social mask has taken over your life. You're being who others expect you to be, not who you really are. This specific part I find quite dangerous because it leads us to feel a deep, existential emptiness that we often don't see. We just feel it there. I made a complete video about this subject. I highly recommend you watch it after you finish this one. But first, I've separated 3 Carl Jung techniques so you can work with your shadow in a practical way. Technique 1. Projection analysis. For a week, write down every time you judge someone harshly. Then ask, how does this characteristic I criticize exist, even subtly, in me? The goal here isn't to make you feel guilty. It's to recover the parts of you that were repressed. Technique 2. Dialogue with the shadow. Jung used active imagination. Sit in silence and imagine your shadow as a person. What would they be like? What age would they have? How would they dress? Imagine them, and if you want, you can even give them a name, like your Tyler Durden. Understand what characteristics they repress, positive or not, and try to understand what your shadow is trying to show you. Technique 3. Dream interpretation. Jung discovered that the shadow appears in dreams as a figure of the same sex as you. Pay attention to these figures. They're trying to show you repressed aspects of your personality, but beware of a common trap. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting on all your impulses. It means recognizing them consciously so you can choose how to express them constructively. If you discover aggressive impulses in your shadow, it doesn't mean you should fight with everyone. It means you can channel that aggressiveness to defend your beliefs, establish boundaries, and fight for important causes. If you find repressed vanity, it doesn't mean you should become narcissistic. It means you can accept your natural need for recognition and seek it in healthy ways, but not depend on it to be a complete and happy person. The final result of this work is liberating. You stop wasting energy maintaining a perfect image. You stop being controlled by emotions you don't understand. You stop repeating destructive patterns without knowing why. You become genuinely yourself, complex, contradictory, human, but conscious and consciously choosing how to live. When Jung emerged from his 6-year journey through the unconscious, he was no longer the same man who had entered. The brilliant but conventional psychiatrist of his 30s had become something much greater, an explorer of the human psyche who had mapped territories no one had dared visit before. From 1919, Jung produced some of the most influential ideas in modern psychology. The psychological types we use today, like introversion and extroversion, the concept of complexes, Jungian therapy, archetypal psychology. But more important than his theories was the living proof he represented that it's possible possible to descend into the hell of one's own mind and emerge not destroyed, but transformed. Jung had discovered that our inner darkness is not our enemy. It's a source of energy, creativity, and wisdom that only becomes dangerous when we ignore it. What you most repress, he wrote, can become your greatest strength. He also proved that we don't need to be victims of our unconscious. We can develop a conscious relationship with it. We can dialogue with our rejected parts, integrate our opposites, become truly who we are. But perhaps Jung's most important legacy is this message. You don't need to pretend to be perfect to be valuable. In fact, it's the opposite. The more you accept your imperfection, your complexity, and your complete humanity, the more authentic and powerful you become. Jung lived to 85, continuing to explore the mysteries of the psyche until the end. When he died in 1961, he left a message that resonates to this day. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Today, more than 60 years later, we live in an era Jung might recognize. People desperately seeking authenticity in a world of social masks. Leaders unconscious of their shadows making destructive decisions. Entire societies denying their collective traumas. But we also see signs of hope, a growing self-knowledge movement, therapy becoming more accepted, people brave enough to question their conditioning. Jung taught us that healing the world begins with healing ourselves, that we can't change what we don't recognize, that our greatest contribution to humanity may be simply becoming conscious of our own shadows and accepting them. As he said, the man who has not passed through the hell of his passions has never overcome them. Carl Jung left us a message that echoes through time. Life only truly begins when you stop running from who you really are. For 6 years, he voluntarily dove into his own darkness and emerged with a gift for all humanity, proof that we can face our internal demons and not just survive, but thrive. Jung discovered that our shadow, everything we repress, deny, and reject in ourselves, is not our enemy. It's a source of energy, creativity, and wisdom waiting to be integrated. He showed us that we don't need to be perfect to be complete, that our greatest strength may be hidden in what we most try to avoid, and that the key to freedom is not eliminating our darkness, but making peace with it. The question Jung leaves us: do you have the courage to dive into your own darkness?